Welcome to the first breakout session of the BEAM 2016 conference. My name is Deborah Randall. I'm a market development consultant based in Nairobi, originally from Canada. I'm excited today. We're going to really look at how to make a market system development dream team, and we've got some really great presenters. Just wanted to, something that Jim Tamborden said in the main session I think really resonates here, and he said after 15 years of doing market systems work, why don't we have bigger successes? We need high performing staff to do it, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Some practical reasons of how, practical solutions, practical suggestions on how to actually build a great team so that we can have better performing programs. So what I want you to do, I'm just going to just briefly kind of explain the structure. In the middle of your table, there's just like a little handout here. You can just grab this. We're going to start with a 30-minute plenary by Peter Rojakamp, and he's going to talk about successful programs, successful teams, looking at the CAVAC program. And then we're going to split into 3 groups and do some speed dating sessions. Now, how many of you have done speed dating before? Anyone here? Maybe you won't admit that, but so don't all run out of the room screaming. It's not a one-on-one thing. We're going to actually do 3 groups, and you're going to rotate around the room. And the idea of this is to give you a little more, with 3 sub-session speakers, a little more intimacy, a little ability to just interrogate, share, discuss some of the issues around the team. So you're going to have a chance to kind of be a bit more one-on-one with the session presenters. All right, so I'm just going to hand it over to Peter. And welcome to our session.
A question we don't ask ourselves, not only what was successful, but which were the ones that were not successful. Oh.
They need it for the camera.
Oh, I need it for the camera. Really? Oh, gee. Where was I? Yeah, and that's really a pity, because I think as a field, we have been doing this maybe since the change of the millennium. But really to get forward, I think we need to start analyzing which are the successful and not successful programs and why, and start learning questions. And actually Jim mentioned a little bit this early stages of market development, what was then called BDS, around the millennium with the seminars in Turin and so. Who was there? Can I ask that? One? Yeah, of course, Jim, you were there. One more face, okay. So, a few people were there. Because that was really, I think, a very good moment in the development of private sector, because then a group of donors and practitioners did ask that question. They did look back at which programs work and which not, and they drew some very powerful conclusions. Stop doing that, this is what we need to do. And what I think what we're doing now is still more or less the same that what came out of these early sessions, the core of it. What we didn't do then at that time was ask the question that actually Patricia asked this morning is, can we implement it? That's what you said, eh? And I think we ignored a little bit the question of how do we do that, even though there is now this manual of Springfield. That's another topic. But I think we never really as a team asked, how do we make these programs successful? And that is a bit what I offer you today, with what I think is actually one of the successful programs, the CAVAC program in Cambodia. How did we do that? How did we come to that? So I can't read your mind, but maybe read your mind for yourself. So how do you look at our field? Do you look at our field like, well, there are some clouds, but the sun is shining, and in general, the field looks great, okay, most projects are okay? Or are you more in this field? The clouds, the dark clouds are coming across us, and we're a bit in trouble, and most projects don't look so great, but maybe a handful, maybe okay. So if you think like this, then maybe you chose the wrong session, because maybe not so much in it. But if actually you think a little bit more, this is how our field looks like, then, well, I can maybe with the CAVAC example tell a little bit more how we may get a few more of these flowers up. So if we ask, now we talk about implementing, if we asked about, probably all of you have a different route, a different idea, this is how it needs to be done. So my offer today is, well, one of these routes is the CAVAC route, and at least that one we know led to success. Now I skip to the last question, not because I have to be fast, but that makes help it a bit. I think the real conclusion of my session will be successful program fully embrace the complex socio-economic reality. Now we talked a lot about adaptive management, complexity and that stuff. So that I think is some of the key lessons that will hopefully come out through my presentation. Do I really need that mic? Okay, so complexity, big words. I try to break it down to what I think are the two key elements, flexibility and the team. Flexibility starts actually in the beginning of your program where, let's say, you have to find the right thing at the right time, at the right place. You have to find your relevance, or in other words, you have to develop the offer that is really needed at that time, that really can make that change. And that is normally not coming from your project design. These consultants who do that for a few weeks, they don't get that. That is a project needs to position, it needs to find the relevance and needs flexibility for it. And once you start, I think the practitioners amongst us know we never get it right the first time. We always need to change and improve. So embracing complexity means flexibility to start with. I hope you make notes, Patricia, on that one. And of course the team. Well, I talk about this much more because that is the theme of this, this presentation. So let's not waste too much time on that. Which one is the odd out? I talked about fully embrace the complex socio-economic reality. Fully embrace, I mean, actually, if you look at the designs that most of our programs have these days, they're not designed for success. They're designed to get them approved through a very bureaucratic donor where everybody has something to say about it. It's an endless compromise. And the designs I've seen lately, I think they're implementable almost. We don't design for success. And I mean, I see a few team leaders here. I feel like these guys who are told to run a marathon, but then in Italy they tie our legs. Or we get these endless hoops we just talked about, the gym. Oh, disability, whatever. We're more busy jumping through all these hoops, and then we're finally starting, we figure out actually the design has a number of wheels in it. A lot of people are at the steering wheel, not just the team. Well, you can guess the other ones as well, I suppose. Does this matter? Yes, it does. Because if you believe in the picture on the left, where the clouds are gathering above us, we can't afford this. We can't afford, if there are just a handful of successful programs like Jim hinted at, we can't afford at the start already being completely cut off. So it is important to have that route if we really want to embrace this socio-economic complexity. Okay, I promised to do this on the hand of an example, the KAVAK program in Cambodia. So I have to explain maybe a little bit about that program. Started 2010. The first phase ended last December, but it had a second phase with a new team leader who left already. It had two main components. One was irrigation, but the other one was looking at what we would call, I used to call, well, what do we call it? I think it is market systems these days. It's the same thing, M4P, whatever. So we use these same principles in what we call the agribusiness component. We worked with a lot of companies. So there was the two main components. Maybe I have to tell a little bit about Cambodia. So Cambodia had a very, very dark period in the 70s when you had the Khmer Rouge and 1-2 million people died. Most people with education were amongst them. And then when they were, the Vietnamese came in and they kicked out, fortunately, the Khmer Rouge, but then the rest of the world didn't like the Vietnamese, so it was another 10 years of boycotted by the rest of the world. So in the 90s, when things started to open up a little bit in Cambodia, there was nothing left. Farmers were absolute subsistence farmers. It was year zero, you could say. So when KAVAK started 15, 20 years later, it was surprising how much the economy has grown from that moment. And farmers already started, they didn't depend on agriculture anymore. They became much more commercial farmers. But if you looked at the yields, and you looked at how many crops lost, they were actually not doing a good job with modern farming. Now, a Cambodian farmer, you don't need to tell him how to produce rice, because they have done it for hundreds or maybe thousands of years. But they shift to modern agriculture, where you use inputs, new crops, produce for profit maximizing rather than enough to eat. They didn't really know how to do that. So when we asked farmers in 2010, how do you make your decisions? Well, then they said, government extension services? Nah. NGOs? Well, they were also not so popular. And private sector? No, no, no. The private sector doesn't give us any advice. They're just selling cheap inputs. So that is a bit how we got in. Our relevance, when I talked about it, our relevance, we found that especially in these input markets, where nobody gave proper advice to companies and we thought to farmers, and we thought the best way to do it is through companies. So we worked over the years with around a third of the fertilizer companies when you look at the market share, around a quarter of the pesticide companies. And if you compare that situation of completely not talking to each other to 5 years later, it was like 180 degrees change. At the moment, almost all companies do give advice. Actually, the ones who don't give advice or don't engage with farmers lose a lot of market share. So that is an enormous change, and our role in that, we really believe, was pivotal. We really think we did a number of things that otherwise this would never have happened. And well, one of the things we did, of course, we worked with this company to help them change their business model. So these were two of the big winners in our program. We did other things. Irrigation, I think, was also good value for money. Maybe slightly on the edge of what people call market systems, but we did try to apply the same things. At the end of the program, there were around 20,000 farmers who have now year-round access to irrigation. We were successful in some other markets, but the size wasn't that big. There was also a lot of markets we were in where we either completely failed or we stepped out because we thought it wouldn't work. Now, this is still a story, and you're fed up with stories, I think, Jim, but this is a systemic story. You want numbers. So we did, we applied the DCD standards way of calculating outreach, and we came to a number, according to the definitions, of around 340,000 households who, after these 2 years, will have benefited already from our program. But if you really look at it, it's actually these 2 million rice farmers who now all have access around their doorstep almost throughout the country. Now you say that is still not impact. What about our impact? This was already raised this morning, but not new for anyone. There aren't that many large projects who manage to come up with reliable, credible figures. And well, we in CAVAC really tried hard. I think if you look at the field, there are quite some programs now who manage to get to the base camp, who have done their first audit maybe, who have their systems in place, and so were we 3 years ago when we also did an audit. But that climb from base camp to the summit of having real data, oh man, that was a steep one. And it was a steep one because there wasn't much examples even. We tried a lot of things. Things didn't work, tried other things. We put a lot of resources in it. We did large surveys, 1,200 farmers, 600, 700 farmers. We did the real tools, regression analysis, the whole lot. And that came to the following figures. Now you want to see people out of poverty. I'm not going to give you that one, but then you need to read my documents. But the thing where we feel very comfortable to put out is, what is the additional volume or value of the production that would not have been there without us? And that for the fertilizer market, where we think our data is pretty reliable, already last year the survey showed in the wet and dry season together a value of around $17 million, and that will increase. That's every year that will come back and increase. the pesticide market, where we first had to do a lot of business enabling environment stuff, because the government didn't want us to work there at all. But once we got that more or less going and we were allowed to get in there, we think actually we did a much better job, because it was an absolute mess when we started. And our early assessment is it will be over $20 million of additional crop each year, but we probably need to do another survey to validate that. So this is not completely profit, but I think the way it works, this is almost profit for farmers. Irrigation was also successful. We think, well, we have very reliable data because it's very easy to measure. We think when all the schemes are online next year, it will be every year above 40 million, the value. But there you have to deduct the cost as well. So that is slightly different. Now, if you compare this to the cost of the program, and that is a very difficult calculation, but it is somewhere around 30 or 40 million US dollars. So that means easy within a year it's paid back. And then every year it will keep on continuing. So I think that is a good value for money. We were good in some other sectors and as well, but as you see, it's not so reliable. So it's a bit of portfolio of impact, but the key ones are the ones that we can sell. You didn't see me keep my hands crossed, so I'm sure some of you will say, yeah, you can tell that, but where's the proof? Huh? Well, that's hard in this field, but what we have done is we try to be as transparent as possible. So we wrote a completion report that you all can read, where we explained, it's a thick one, everything, how we calculate everything. And that's on that Dropbox. We also put all our surveys there, all raw data, all questionnaires, all assumptions, how we got to that, all calculations. So everything is available for everybody who doesn't believe me here, and you shouldn't believe me, but you should, if you have the time, go through that. I did write a small handout for some people who are interested that does a bit of a summary of it. If you want to read it now, I can put it here at the end. Yeah, so is it credible? At least we did everything we could, I think. But back to the real issue today. Embracing the socio-economic reality. What is that? Now, I think everybody seems to know a bit about what that is these days. I think it started a bit for me with reading Bill Easterly's Stop Being Planners, Become Searchers, or I love the work that Owen Barter did with the Kapuscinski lecturers about our reality is really different than we always thought. You have to see it as a complex reality, and that has a lot of consequences. That part is brilliant but very theoretical. So down to earth. A typical design of a program, analysis, intervention design, we all know that. And then, okay, we're in a complex reality. What do? We do more research. And also within AusAid, they told me, Peter, more research. Well, my absolute belief from Catalyst, where I worked for, and from Kavak, and from my present project as well, this doesn't work. The reality is too difficult. Forget it. If we implement like this, we will not be successful. This is the model we should use in complex markets when we embrace socio-economic. We learn a bit and we get out there, we implement and we keep on learning. Of course, with learning you improve, you adjust constantly, but it's constantly trying, well, trying is not the right word, implementing and learning, implementing and learning. This is the core model I think we should embrace. What does that mean? I mean, I'm not sure if we're already on the same page, so I added another slide there. So in the world of the complex socioeconomic reality, we don't talk about problems, we talk about opportunities, we talk about innovations, we don't talk about beneficiaries, we talk about markets. We don't do constraint analysis, we analyze incentives. We don't say, yes, they should. We talk about what's the business case, what's the reality. We don't talk about monitoring as well. Maybe that is nice for the next sessions. It is about continuous learning. Failure, what do we do with that? We do a quiz on that. How do you want to do the quiz? You want to put your hand up or you want to keep it secret to yourself? What do we do? Hand up? Okay. The boss says hand up. Okay, so how many interventions should be successful? I gave 3 options, 75% at least 50, or if 10, 15 is great, it's enough. This is of the intervention. So number 1, hands up. Okay, 75, you're brave, that's the only one. At least 50% should be successful. Oh, it's a bit half the people. Who think 10, 15% is enough? Okay, happy to see that. But of course, this is a trick question. Because we don't talk about failure. That is really the wrong concept. We should talk about optimizing our portfolio. And I use the Kavak as an example. So this is all our initial markets. And this is over the years. The blue is the resources we put in there. So what we have been trying to do is constantly optimizing our resources over our portfolio. Initially, we wanted to have a very large portfolio, because you normally don't know which one are going to succeed in this reality. And then over time, you learn and you adjust your portfolio. It's an art. It is a constant, and you do that at the end of the project. How do I have my maximum impact? So not failure, it is portfolio management. And well, Tim, Harvard, the success always starts with failure. It does. So you need to have that large portfolio to allow for that and to maximize your impact. I will tell a lot of things, and because it will start dizzying, I will write them down for you. So fully embrace complexity, no compromises, and a flexible portfolio for maximum impact. If you do that, you can't have intermediate targets. And I know David likes them. You can't have them. Then you don't manage that. Okay, we were supposed to talk about the team today. You started to worry a bit. No, it's coming, don't worry. So this is the Kavak team. And we do a few more quizzes. I hope that helps you see if you're, well, whatever. How large should that team be? Should it be 1, 10 is enough? 2, actually you have 2 options, 6 to 12 or 30 to 40. Or third, well, outsource most of it, just have a core team. So hands up for the first, maximum 10. Okay. Option 2? Some doubtful. Third one, outsource. Okay, much more there, that's interesting. Keep it in your mind, I do another one first. Organogram, how should your organization look like? Flat as possible. I think you disagreed with that already. You should have some middle management, it's good for efficiency. Or, well, actually add also junior levels, senior levels of your staff, because then people can grow, it's good for motivation. So hands up again. Flat organization. Okay, there are a few. Middle management is good. Efficiency. And the third one. Okay, okay. So this is what I see a lot in programs, a typical organogram. If you embrace the socio-economic complexity, you need flexibility, you need people who really learn, you need creativity, and the best way to kill that is this organogram. And I'm so convinced after Kavak and Catalyst that every time you put in middle management, things got stuck. So cut them out. That's really my message, as flat as possible. And then I looked at this longer and I thought, this is still wrong. What is wrong? This should be our organogram. And that is more than semantic, because the socio-economic, the reality out there is so complex. And the agents of change is, and this is the topic, is our national experts, because experts never understand really what's going on. So these women and men go out there, they do their work, they try to understand why things work, why things don't work, and try to create opportunities. And our role is just support. M&E teams are support staff. We support the agents of change. That's where it's about. They are the core people who make this work. So yeah, flat as possible. I'm sorry, this is maybe not your answer, but it's the Kavak answer. And theory says the optimal span of control is 6, I think. Huh? People who read this book know that. So maybe over time you stretch it a bit to 12, so that if you have one manager, that would be a good size. But if you do that, you can't have that large portfolio that you optimize. So that the alternative is have a number of components with a few managers and then still have that span of control. And that was actually exactly what we did in Catalyst and what worked well, and what I did even more in Kavak. I think that is, you need your size, but you, well, it should be around this. Probably it gets clearer later why 3 doesn't work in the Kavak way. Okay, then we talk about the managers, and Jim already talked about that. Well, we know they don't exist. What maybe exists, and that's more how we feel, in the land of the blind, maybe one-eyed man is king. And I so fully support you, Jim, in these notes there, but maybe from another angle, we're the only industry in the world probably who doesn't invest in their managers. Every good industry does that, and this industry looks the other way. And as a team leader myself, I never saw a proper manual. I never went to a training. I never was exposed to whatever it is. And the donors, they say, oh, but it's the managing contractors who do it. And the managing contractors, we don't have money for these guys. They earn too much money. Whatever it is, people look the other way, it doesn't work. I think it should go back to you. The donors need to do something about this, or we won't be successful. So I put it on the board. Donors invest in managers, and, well, flat organizations. I think I made that point before. Okay. The national expert, I talked already a bit about that. And we hire them all. What is their CV? How do we hire them? What's their profile? Quickly, good education or experience? Good education? Hands up. Oh, experience. Ah, it will be good education, I'll explain. Work experience, very important, or capacity is more important? Very important? Capacity? Okay. It's a bit uncomfortable to put your hands up, but it's good for yourself as well, I think. Aid experience, very useful or better not? Who thinks very useful? Okay. Who thinks better not? Ah, a lot. Oh, even real advocates there. What kind of people do we hire in Prisma or others? Is it more generalist, or is it people with technical experience? Who's for the more generalist? Okay. Experience, technical expertise? Okay, a bit 50-50. Aspirations, do we hire people who want to be a manager or people who want to be an entrepreneur? Who thinks we should hire managers? Oh, I thought, a few. And who think it should be the rest, I hope. Private sector background, should we hire people who work actually in the private sector? Yeah, and who think we shouldn't, but creativity is more important? Okay, not so many. Okay. Ding, that's what happens in my computer. These people don't exist. We again asked the wrong questions. In Bangladesh and in Cambodia, and I'm sure in most countries you work, these are irrelevant questions because they don't exist. So what did we do what did we do a bit in Catalyst? We started to experiment with this, and we've worked it out more as a system in Kavak. We thought, what is the core skill of these agents of change, of these national staff? Where is it really about? And it's really about being able out there in the field to understand, why do entrepreneurs do things and why not? How does that affect markets and not? Why do things really fail early on? Why doesn't it work? And then also be creative. How can I twist? How can I create incentives that change the behavior of entrepreneurs and other marketplaces? Man, that is difficult. That is very, very hard difficult. But that's the core role. Because if your staff can't do that, you never learn. You never know why it goes wrong, and your project has failed before you started. So, fortunately, countries I work, there are plenty of very clever people. In all countries we live, probably. Just the aim is to find them. So sometimes we joke, let's just do an IQ test. Forget this whole recruitment, we just hire the people with the highest IQ, and that's probably a good thing. Better than the most recruitments. So yeah, the core thing, we realized was this, this learning, this ability to do it. So that is where we hire people for. And then we plan a very conscious learning process over the years. So over the years, depending on their absorption capacity, we add more and more of the market function. So, sorry, I forgot to say that. I put here the core tasks that the project has. I didn't put all, it's a bit summary. And so they all need to happen from day one. But the core staff we hire in the beginning, we use them here. And that's a lot of the work. And then over time, when they're ready for it, we add gender courses, we add environment, we add management tasks, reporting, but not in the first few weeks because they drown, they can't handle. So you can only put as much as people can handle. And we make this a very deliberate effort. We really have, okay, now they're ready, we add another step of it. That means that the role of this coach, this manager, is really a coach. That is, we deliberately expose them, let them make mistakes, and add more and more. It's a tough learning curve. And this worked very well, I think, in Kavak. It worked in Catalyst to some extent as well. So over the year, you can go home earlier, or you can grow your project a bit. That is... Okay, so these were the things you put. So we quickly run them through it, or you got it? So capacity is everything, and education is a fantastic indication of it, because it is a self-selection. Work experience, well, people have worked too long in the sector, think they know the answers, and they stop asking the questions. So actually, I don't like too much work experience. Aid experience, oh, if someone works for an NGO and use all these things in the left line, but what about the beneficiaries? I mean, it's lost before you start, so I don't hire them actually. People who want to be a manager, they want hierarchies, they want promotion, they don't want to learn. People who want to become an entrepreneur want to learn, because they want, so that's the best motivation. Private sector background, to be honest, till recently I thought that was the thing to do. And in Catalyst we did that a bit. In Kavak I hired a few of these private sector people. In a way they all failed for some reason. And what I do now is I think it is better to look at creativity, because that's what they need. Okay. Whew. We talked a bit, I mean, you raised that already. Let me add one or two things that I think from my perspective are important for the coach. I think something is important that a manager needs to know where we're heading. That means you need to know in 5 years' time what are these key factors that will determine if this project is a success or a failure. And every decision you make is geared towards that. Proactively, you see, is the project on track to get there? I think that's the trick of being a good manager. And I think it's very hard to do that if you're never exposed to a good program. Of course, all the other things that you mentioned, Jim, are also correct. Okay, hire the young and bright and build that learning environment. Huh? This is the last slide. I've been talking a lot. You can read, and I have a new 30 seconds. You can read yourself. You need 30 seconds over there? Take your time and think about it. Yeah, so hiring and training is okay, but what you want is people who speak out. Hey, what I've been doing didn't work, and that goes so much against human nature. And I mean, even this group, we don't speak out about failed projects either. So that, but if we don't do that, in this reality where we don't get it, if our staff don't say after 2 years, Peter, I don't think that worked. If they don't do that, we'll never be successful, because we never get it right the first time. So I think, honestly, in Catalyst, we didn't do that right. We didn't realize that. So we took that lesson to Kavak, And from day one, we thought we did everything right. I recall we had the parties to celebrate the first failures. Every time people were critical, we praised them, and things went wrong. We had the discussions, why did it wrong? Why didn't you say so? And we thought we were great. And then in year 3, we started to figure out that things went wrong and staff were still not telling us. So again, we did workshops and whatever. Actually, I phoned around to some of my colleagues and said, what did you do? But nobody seems to have dealt with it, unfortunately. But then I think the effort we did in year 3 did work. What meant that in year 3 and 4, we almost completely changed our portfolio. We stopped market, we stopped interventions, we almost changed every other intervention we had, because finally we figured it out. But that culture was so essential. And I think that laid the basis for, in the end, to have the impact we had. Okay, so this is almost the last slide. These are the notes. If you take this home, it's good. So build that culture of learning and control. Call it reflection, but it is hard and it is essential, because you never get it right the first time. So if you don't figure out, you fail. So people who want to read a bit more, this is my last slide. Kavak actually had a good website, how we worked. I wrote a small paper actually for another seminar on some frequently asked questions on Kavak. I will put a few here, but I'm sure Beam can put it online. If you really want to go through my impact, go to the Dropbox where you have our completion report. Part 1 and 3 are especially interesting to read. And the last thing, with some managers, and one is sitting here, Harold in the back, we wrote a bit of a paper for donors on how we think from a manager's perspective you should design programs. That was it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Peter. Okay, so now what we're going to do is he's given us a really great overview. Now is our opportunity to kind of break in these sub-sessions or the speed dating groups and actually just share, learn, interrogate, bring your questions. So if you take this little form, there may not be enough for everyone. We're about 45 in this room. So what I need you to do is to break into 3 groups. So this sub-session 1, Mark, if you can stand, it's Mark Napier. He's the Director of Financial Sector Deepening. That'll be sub-session 1. Helen Bradbury, over in this corner, sub-session 2. She's with Mercy Corps, and Georgian will speaking about their building a balanced team. And over here in the corner will be Patricia Seeks from DFID and Peter Bees from SDC. So again, it's your chance to listen, share, interrogate, and bring your own learning together. So let's try to work about 15 people in each sub-session. So time is over for the speed dating. So just finish up. I think the next question really is what next? What does this mean for us? And maybe you can just give 1 or 2 points each on what some of the key points that came from your session and what does this mean? What are the next steps?
Right, hello. First group, actually, I'll just do a little bit what emerged as the key thing in each group. In the first group, it was, we developed a tiny little discussion about when you've got someone with a particular skill set, do you really go with that skill set and emphasize and allow them to sort of become, you know, an expert in that field and utilize that, you know, and then an opposing view, which was that actually you've got to be also, well, not necessarily opposing, but part of the management approach, you've got to be careful that you don't get siloed skill sets and experts, and you've got to make sure that you know, people go out, let's say if it was a field experience thing. I think we kind of got to the point, or at least I thought we did, where, you know, you manage that along with a sort of portfolio team management approach. Retention, we talked about in the next group, and incentives for staying. You've got donor-heavy environments, for example, poaching, things like working with your institutional structures to make sure salaries are decent ones, but also there are other incentives too, like flexi time, like other benefits, like decent hotels for people to stay in when they go on field trips, decent per diems, and all the rest of it, you know. So really having a look at the proper conditions of people's work and paternity leave. I'm going to flag that one up. Yeah, we do have that. And recruitment. We talked a lot about recruitment. Things like where you place your job advertisement, having stuff written down so that if you're in a situation where you've got, let's say, an HR person or somebody from procurement who's got a very traditional mindset, you've got stuff written down to say you can choose one candidate that you'd prefer with flexible open values to another, let's say, somebody who's been around the block a few times and is the obvious suspect. That's just a very tiny recap.
Great, thank you. Okay, over to group 3.
So we talked a lot about the importance of learning on the job and not relying on a 2-week or 3-week course, which is very theoretical. Learning on the job is really important, and how can we facilitate that? Well, there were some ideas, internships, and using kind of counselling or coaching from other programs. It's clear that some long-standing programs have created quite a lot of capacity, which has moved into other programs, but sometimes out of the sector altogether. And we talked a bit about the incentives for learning, or for the right kind of learning. And there do seem to be some problems with incentives. The bidding process seems to be an issue. Creating time seems to be actually a bigger issue than resources, especially in the early stages. And we also talked quite a lot about the problems with the market structure for market systems development. With lots of freelancers and sort of body shop, big companies, and then donors paying. We talked a bit about career paths for practitioners, and in the end, we were sort of challenged that really donors should own the problem in the sort of market systems approach of who does and who pays. In the end, donors pay, so we should probably own the problem and put our minds to it and do more to gather ideas about what we can do.
That was a perfect summary. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, and just the last group, Mark.
I think there's quite an emerging theme from all the groups really about that needing to acknowledge that there is a big difference between your sort of SPV model and your contracted out model, and it's very different when you're talking about building institutions. And if you're talking about building institutions, then you can start to put in place those structures to manage people in a long-term way for whatever your long-term needs are. It's just different when you're a contracted out program. The incentives are very, very different. So I think that is an issue, and that sort of leads you to the second point, which is really around outsourcing. We're going to need to think about effective ways of outsourcing some of these challenges. Do we need to have some kind of centralized place where people can really go to benefit from M4P training or other kinds of training? So that was it. On growth, we talked a lot about managing growth, and the a lot of good points about the need to avoid hierarchy. So that's just dismantled the hierarchy I had in my head as FSD Africa grows. I'm going to have to think differently now about the way we're proposing to do things. But also don't be shy about hiring people with very different skill sets, because actually staff really like that. They like to rub shoulders with people who have different talents and different skills that they can learn from. But on the other side, make sure you don't undermine the career aspirations of your existing staff who might have just gone into that role actually. Only you just ended up hiring somebody to do that. And then on data, we talked about how to create a data-hungry environment, and I think one of the good points was decide what minimum data requirements you have, and don't force everybody really to become data experts when they're never going to be that.
Thank you. So thanks to Peter, thanks for our sub-session leaders. I just want to say Beam Exchange is just recently compiling some research on the capacity building market system, which outlines some of these key issues on how to build a good team, how to actually have better performing teams. So if you're interested, I have some information here.